So this is a little bit about developing standards for the industry, but also developing owner-specific standards. So different owners have requirements. So for example, a healthcare owner would have requirements on how they put a hospital or clinic together. A lot of these requirements traditionally have been put into Excel files or PDF files or people's heads. But we treat everything as a database, which means that we have a database of all these different room types for a hospital. Now we're leading into this actual BIMStorm exercise where we'll be using this. This is about a combination of industry standards, owner standards, a database driving into building information modeling, and then creating an interface that doesn't require you to be a technical expert in BIM or even a technical expert in healthcare facilities, but it gives you at your fingertips information to make decisions about how do we plan a clinic for an emergency situation. Obviously, we're looking at healthcare facilities here, too, but it can apply to others. The formula is basically the same if you think about the underlying technology and the strategy. It's about assets at the building level, at the room level, at the equipment level, and the connectivity between them. It doesn't matter that it's this is healthcare or this is an airport or whatever. It's the same approach that we found that can be replicated and organized. So we're going to run through a little exercise here. I'll do it on screen, and some of you have seen this, but I wanted to walk through this again because we're going to be replicating this process a bit later on and with using ChatGPT. But this is the process of selecting for a healthcare facility. So if we say for a healthcare facility, we need exam rooms. And this was set up like an Amazon shopping cart. So you can go and say, okay, I want this exam room here. I want a screening room, and I need some other support facilities, a break room, a day room. So selecting these and adding numbers here ends up with a shopping cart. Just like in Amazon, when you start changing these numbers, it's updating the order in the background, and it's not burdening you with saying, well, what do you need in the exam room? It's already figured out. It's a template that can still be adjusted. And this is what usually takes a lot of time, is kind of organizing what we know to start a project off and even to communicate that to the designer or the builder. So from an owner's perspective, having a bit more database that's connected with the relationships and everything, this space has equipment in it. This equipment has costs associated with it. It has electrical requirements. It has other characteristics, but I'm going to go ahead and just build this first version of it and request a BIM to be built. So it's actually building information model from that data in the background that could be shifting and adjusting on the fly. The owner might say, well, this year we don't need that piece of equipment in the room, and it would drop off. That's how this was set up. So now it's generated a model. And if I go into my email, I see this message here that says, okay, we have your model ready. If I click on the BIM gallery, then it builds that BIM from the request that I just made. So it's going and grabbing the data, creating the graphic, creating reports, and creating a button that allows me to download it or export it into other applications like Revit or even Excel if I want an Excel file. So here are the rooms that I requested. These rooms have assets in them. The assets have data associated with them, you know, what type of light that is, other information. And I can go in here and say, I want to email this to Mike. So Mike's going to get it in his email. So I can start sharing. So it's basically about using the cloud technologies like this to be able to quickly assemble information and then send it off. So there's obviously, I'm a human here, I'm interacting with a machine. I'm sending it to Mike, who's going to make other decisions. But later on, I'm going to show how ChatGPT, we wanted to replicate this process using ChatGPT. Can an AI actually go in here and do something with this type of a workflow? When you zoom all the way out, you see these little chiclets here, but inside these, there's information about what goes into this exam room. This is what we made earlier, the request that we made. So all of this is important to some people. They want to know how the sink is sitting here and what this, do we have all the equipment here? But then if you zoom out, other users might say from a total cost of ownership, which is actually a true use case. Los Angeles Community College wants to know which rooms have tile and which ones have carpet and how much it's going to cost us to clean these rooms, right? That's important information too. So that abstraction level is important, but you also need to have the data in the background to drive that. So this was the request that we made. The scenario here that we set up for this BIMStorm is we're planning a clinic in Ankara, right? So we have all the pieces now. We could start to assemble them. I'm not going to go through and do the whole assembly here, but essentially it ends up looking like this. This was done in one of the previous BIMStorms by Mark Giuliani Architects. He basically took the requirements and laid it out. And this is a BIM of all the stuff in there. And then if we zoom back into, now we don't want to land it somewhere in Ankara in Turkey. So we have a map, it's a GIS map, but inside the GIS map, there are BIM objects, the ones that we were just looking at. And if we look at them here, we see an assembly and what I mentioned earlier. So we have the clinic that we just were looking at, but we also have the microgrid objects that were designed last time in the BIMStorm. We know that a 20 kilowatt array needs this much, and a containerized solar microgrid needs a shipping container that looks like that. So we were actually running scenarios of if we don't have power and we need to have a field hospital, what kind of resources do we need to support this clinic? What's the minimum that we need? And then what happens if we want to start building up more capabilities? So this particular clinic that we landed here in Ankara, we say, okay, let's move it over and find a site. And I'm going to be a little bit rough here because I'm not actually designing it, but it's okay. Here, we're going to put it on this parking lot site. So by having an actual geospatial location gives us immediate feedback of, does it fit here, first of all? What are the logistics of building on this site? Can we get those shipping containers from port to here in a right amount of time if it's a temporary field hospital? There's a lot of different technical, logistical questions from an asset management perspective, and also design and construction questions that need to be answered very quickly before we make the wrong turn and go in the wrong direction. And that's what these BIMStorms have been about. Even for actual projects, we actually run through like this. But one thing that we tried, we said, okay, everything that I showed you earlier about, let's ask the program to give us those spaces in the Amazon shopping cart to build a clinic. Let's put it on the site. What do we need for that? We said, what if we ask the same question to ChatGPT? What would it do? And we tried it both in the newer version, the 4.0 and 3.5. There's slight variations in speed and the types of answers that we get, but it's pretty consistent as far as, okay, it spits something out. So we said, okay, what if we can teach it? The first thing we did is we said, okay, we have a table in Excel of spaces that we think we need. The owner's saying we want these spaces for this clinic. We said, okay, or these are the types of spaces that a clinic has. So we said, if we can teach ChatGPT that these are the types of spaces that are needed for a clinic, we asked this, the first step we did is we said, store this table of values for a clinic. And we gave it a little bit of hint of what the table was about. There's occupants, there's maximum number of people. We said, okay, store this. So I said, sure, here's a table. It stored it in its memory. Once it was in its memory, we said, create an architectural, and this was a very specific ask. And this is the key thing that we found with ChatGPT and AI. The more precise you can get in your questions, you get more consistency in the output, but you still have to check it. Like Jack said, it's not perfect. And we found that as well too. We said, create an architectural program for design and give us a table with these room types to account for a population of 5,000. So remember in the previous one, I gave it a hint of how many people are per room, per exam room. And then we also said, extrapolate any additional spaces that are needed. In other words, we're saying, we're giving you a list of spaces. Tell us what else you think we might need. We wanted to give it a little bit of a prompt to do more. And it said, sure, here's an example of an architectural program. So it created a whole new program here in this table format. Very simple table, basically the name of the space, how many of those spaces do we need with the square foot occupancy. And it actually added some more in there. It said, note that this is just an example. Calculation of additional spaces require more information. So it wanted more information, but it gave us this table. Then I said, adjust it to assume, oh, this is when I spotted the mistake. It said you need 50 exam rooms. I go, wow, that sounds like a lot. I forgot to tell it that the exam rooms are not constantly filled with patients. They're coming on, every 60 days. I said, what if we adjust it for 60 days and they only need 30 minutes per exam? And the clinic is open from 9 to 5. Can you adjust this table and give us a new table?
Oh, you're saying that humans make mistakes too, Kimon?
Oh yeah, we're not perfect. That's the interesting part about this, is that the more that we can automate the mundane stuff, the AI can check us and prompt us to do things, but we also need to be on the lookout, I think, especially in these early stages as we're learning. I know this is going to get better over time. And the response was, okay, sure, it adjusted it. And it said, here's the assumptions I made. So it's basically using this, it gave us this calculation of how it made these assumptions, and it adjusted the table now. And it added a waiting room. So you're probably going to need a waiting room. We didn't have a waiting room in the list. So it's starting to do things like that. It knows that this is a clinic. It knows that it needs space. It knows that how many patients are there. It adjusted the program like that. And then I said, why does the table show 50 exam rooms if your calculation is for 14? Because it told me it adjusted for 14. And then I scrolled down and I saw 50 here. So I spotted an error there. This was all happening within minutes. It was detailed. Then it said, I apologize. The table shows 50. I'm going to adjust it now. And then it gave me, and it says it's going to adjust. And I said, can you create a new table? So then it said, sure, here's a new table for the calculation. And then I noticed that it dropped the room ID from it. I said, can you add the room, well, not the room ID, the room code, each space way back in the original table. And by doing that, I ended up with a finished program that looked like this. Basically, I'm zooming ahead here. I had a cleaned up version that looked like it was ready to go. And the reason I wanted it in this format is because this can be imported into what I showed you earlier that generated those spaces. So I took this table and fed it into the system rather than going through the Amazon shopping cart and picking things. I used the output from what ChatGPT calculated to then go and say, okay, import it in, land it in Anchor, and build the program. So here's the actual BIM of all the spaces that came from that ChatGPT output. So this is still a first version, but I can see that the more that you can connect the dots and automate between these systems, you can actually skip a few steps in between. But just this alone actually was pretty interesting because we could see the flow from the request down to the actual BIM on the site. And I'm showing a lot of our system here, but it's really not only about this, because the way that we work is we like to connect to other platforms. So if there's a platform that does energy analysis, for example, we could take this data here and start connecting to it and do that type of analysis. Yeah, but that's the end result here. And then obviously the actual organizing of the spaces, a human came in and actually moved them around, but that can be automated as well too. But the question is, how far is this going to go? And this goes back to Jack's point of how reliable will AI be? And I think for now, it's kind of a combination of using the capabilities of AI along with the tools that we have, and then starting to refine the process and connect the dots to automate more of it, because that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years, even for our system. It started off very kind of manual, and the more and more we connected things, we could start pushing buttons and it generates a shopping cart, for example. So another exercise that we did with chat, we said, okay, last year we got specifications of a microgrid. We have a spreadsheet in Google Sheets with the kilowatt hours and whatever. This spreadsheet here, I said, learn this. I loaded this into ChatGPT and I said, can you, based on this, tell me what I need for this clinic that I just designed? So it went through and picked out, I don't know, I didn't check to see if it was right or not, but it said, based on what you told me, you need a 24 kilowatt microgrid, backup power, blah, 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 for this clinic that I just designed in ChatGPT that looked like this. This was the field clinic. So, because the clinic that I showed earlier was a full clinic. The next question we asked is, the full clinic is great. This was an interesting question here. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I said, since this clinic will take 12 months to construct, suggest an adjusted program for a temporary field hospital or clinic to provide vital services in an earthquake zone. What are the critical assets for that? And then it said, sure, here's an adjusted program for a smaller clinic to be able to give you basic services. In this adjusted program, we have focused on the most essential service. This is the AI telling me that. I didn't have to give it any prompts. I just basically said, learn about this clinic, learn about the energy needs, give me the adjusted requirements, and give it to me in a table that I can import and generate a BIM from. So this is the result of that stripped down version. So at the same time as we're designing the full clinic, it's adjusting to the minimum clinic and then adding the energy requirements based on our other input. So this was kind of reusing a lot of the knowledge that we collected before to kind of generate that output. And then we said, okay, now we want to ship it to Ankara. What are the logistics of shipping this temporary field hospital? How do we containerize it? How many containers do we need? What are our shipping options? Can we go by over land, or by rail, by ship? How much is it going to cost? What are the risks involved if we're shipping? What route should we take? What are the options? What are the risks? So you can read it in more detail here. So we said, okay, let's find the route. And here's the route. So stay away from this area here because there's a lot of conflict up here. So go south. Everything that we just did now is landed in a database, right? With this geometry and data. And from our system, for example, we have what's called an API. An API publishes out this information, which is another very important piece from an asset management and data perspective, is that applications must be open, regardless of open standard or not. If they're not open and they hold the data in their tool, then that's a dead end, because a lot of applications from the past, that was their end goal. We're going to stuff all the data into our systems, and then you're going to buy our system forever. That doesn't scale.